Chapter 5. Emotions. Emotions and values. Throughout the preceding discussion, I have stressed that his ability to reason is man's essential attribute, the attribute which explains the greatest number of his other characteristics. This fact is often obscured by the widespread confusion about the nature and role of emotions in man's life. One frequently hears the statement, "Man is not merely a rational being, he is also an emotional being," which implies some sort of dichotomy, as if, in effect, man possessed a dual nature, with one part in opposition to the other. In fact, however, the content of man's emotions is the product of his rational faculty. His emotions are a derivative and a consequence, which, like all of man's other psychological characteristics, cannot be understood without reference to the conceptual power of his consciousness. As man's tool of survival, reason has two basic functions: cognition and evaluation. The process of cognition consists of discovering what things are, of identifying their nature, their attributes, and properties. The process of evaluation consists of man discovering the relationship of things to himself, of identifying what is beneficial to him and what is harmful, what should be sought and what should be avoided. A value is that which one acts to gain and or keep. It is that which one regards as conducive to one's welfare. A value is the object of an action. Since man must act in order to live, and since reality confronts him with many possible goals, many alternative courses of action, he cannot escape the necessity of selecting values and making value judgments. Value is a concept pertaining to a relation, the relation of some aspect of reality to man, or to some other living entity. If a man regards a thing, a person, an object, an event, a mental state, etc., as good for him, as beneficial in some way, he values it, and, when possible and appropriate, seeks to acquire, retain, and use or enjoy it. If a man regards a thing as bad for him, as inimical or harmful in some way, he disvalues it, and seeks to avoid or destroy it. If he regards a thing as of no significance to him, as neither beneficial nor harmful, he is indifferent to it, and takes no action in regard to it. Although his life and well-being depend on man selecting values that are in fact good for him, i.e., consonant with his nature and needs, conducive to his continued efficacious functioning, there are no internal or external forces compelling him to do so. Nature leaves him free in this matter. As a being of volitional consciousness, he is not biologically programmed to make the right value choices automatically. He may select values that are incompatible with his needs and inimical to his well-being, values that lead him to suffering and destruction. But whether his values are life-serving or life-negating, it is a man's values that direct his actions. Values constitute man's basic motivational tie to reality.
In existential terms, man's basic alternative of for me, or against me, which gives rise to the issue of values, is the alternative of life or death, Chapter 12. But this is an adult, conceptual identification. As a child, a human being first encounters the issue of values through the experience of physical sensations of pleasure and pain. To a conscious organism, pleasure is experienced, axiomatically, as a value, pain, as a disvalue. The biological reason for this is the fact that pleasure is a life-enhancing state, and that pain is a signal of danger, of some disruption of the normal life process. There is another basic alternative, in the realm of consciousness, through which a child encounters the issue of values, of the desirable and the undesirable. It pertains to his cognitive relationship to reality. There are times when a child experiences a sense of cognitive efficacy in grasping reality, a sense of cognitive control, of mental clarity, within the range of awareness possible to his stage of development. There are times when he suffers from a sense of cognitive inefficacy, of cognitive helplessness, of mental chaos, the sense of being out of control and unable to assimilate the data entering his consciousness. To experience a state of efficacy is to experience it as a value. To experience a state of inefficacy is to experience it as a disvalue. The biological basis of this fact is the relationship of efficacy to survival. The value of a sense of efficacy as such, like the value of pleasure as such, is introspectively experienced by man as a primary. One does not ask a man, "Why do you prefer pleasure to pain?" Nor does one ask him, "Why do you prefer a state of control to a state of helplessness?" It is through these two sets of experiences that man first acquires preferences, i.e., values. A man may choose, as a consequence of his errors and/or evasions, to pursue pleasure by means of values that in fact can result only in pain, and he can pursue a sense of efficacy by means of values that can only render him impotent. But the value of pleasure and the disvalue of pain, as well as the value of efficacy and the disvalue of helplessness, remain the psychological base of the phenomenon of valuation. A man's values are the product of the thinking he has done or has failed to do. Values can be a manifestation of rationality and mental health or of irrationality and neurosis. They can be an expression of psychological maturity or of arrested development. They can grow out of self-confidence and benevolence or out of self-doubt and fear. They can be motivated by the desire to achieve happiness or by the desire to minimize pain. They can be born out of the desire to use one's mind or the desire to escape it. They can be acquired independently and by deliberation, or they can be uncritically absorbed from other men by, in effect, a process of osmosis. They can be held consciously and explicitly or subconsciously and implicitly. They can be consistent or they can be contradictory. They can further a man's life or they can endanger it. These are the alternatives possible to a being of volitional consciousness. There is no way for man to regress to the state of an animal, no stereotyped, biologically prescribed pattern of behavior he can follow blindly, no instincts to whose control he can surrender his existence. If he defaults on the responsibility of reason, if he rebels against the necessity of thought, the distortions, the perversions, the corruption that become his values are still a twisted expression of the fact that his is a conceptual form of consciousness. His values are still the product of his mind, but of a mind set in reverse, set against its own proper function, intent on self-destruction. Like rationality, irrationality is a concept that is not applicable to animals, it is applicable only to man.
An animal's basic values and goals are biologically programmed by nature. An animal does not face such questions as, what kind of entity should I seek to become? For what purpose should I live? What should I make of my life? Man does, and men answer these questions in vastly different ways, depending on the quantity and quality of their thinking. Differences in men's basic values reflect differences in their basic premises, in their fundamental views of themselves, of other men, of existence, their views of what is possible to them, and what they can expect of life. Since values involve the relation of some aspect of reality to the valuer, to the acting entity, a man's view of himself plays a crucial role in his value choices. To illustrate this by means of a simple example, a man regards a falling bomb as bad for him because he is aware of his own mortality. If he were physically indestructible, he would appraise the bomb's significance differently. One's conscious or subconscious view of one's own person, one's nature and powers, whether one appraises oneself correctly or not, is implicit in one's value judgments. The degree of a man's self-confidence or lack of it, and the extent to which he regards the universe as open or closed to his understanding and action, will necessarily affect the goals he will set for himself, the range of his ambition, his choice of friends, the kind of art he will enjoy, etc. For the most part, the process by which a man's view of himself affects his value choices does not take place on a conscious level. It is implicit in his evaluations, reflecting earlier conclusions which, in effect, are filed in his subconscious. The subconscious is the sum of mental contents and processes that are outside of or below awareness. Man's subconscious performs two basic tasks which are crucial to his intellectual development and efficient functioning. The subconscious operates as a storehouse of past knowledge, observations, and conclusions. It is obviously impossible for man to keep all of his knowledge in focal awareness, and it operates, in effect, as an electronic computer, performing super-rapid integrations of sensory and ideational material. Thus, his past knowledge, provided it has been properly assimilated, can be instantly available to man, while his conscious mind is left free to deal with the new. This is the pattern of all human learning. Once, a man needed his full mental attention to learn to walk. Then the knowledge became automatized, and he was free to pursue new skills. Once, a man needed his full mental attention to learn to speak. Then the knowledge became automatized, and he was enabled to go forward to higher levels of accomplishment. Man moves from knowledge to more advanced knowledge, automatizing his identifications and discoveries as he proceeds. turning his brain into an ever more efficacious instrument, if and to the extent that he continues the growth process.
Man is a self-programmer. Just as this principle operates in regard to his cognitive development, so it operates in regard to his value development. As he acquires values and disvalues, these, too, become automatized. He is not obliged, in every situation he encounters, to recall all of his values to his conscious mind in order to form an estimate. In response to his perception of some aspect of reality, his subconscious is triggered into a lightning-like process of integration and appraisal. For example, if an experienced motorist perceives an oncoming truck veering toward a collision, he does not need a new act of conscious reasoning in order to grasp the fact of danger. Faster than any thought could take shape in words, he registers the significance of what he perceives. His foot flies to the brake or his hands swiftly turn the wheel. One of the forms in which these lightning-like appraisals present themselves to man's conscious mind is his emotions. His emotional capacity is man's automatic barometer of what is for him or against him, within the context of his knowledge and values. The relationship of value judgments to emotions is that of cause to effect. An emotion is a value response. It is the automatic psychological result, involving both mental and somatic features, of a super-rapid, subconscious appraisal. An emotion is the psychosomatic form in which man experiences his estimate of the beneficial or harmful relationship of some aspect of reality to himself. The sequence of psychological events is, from perception to evaluation to emotional response. On the level of immediate awareness, however, the sequence is, from perception to emotion. A person may or may not be consciously aware of the intervening value judgment. A separate act of focused awareness may be required to grasp it, because of the extreme rapidity of the sequence. That a person may fail to identify either the judgment or the factors involved in it, that he may be conscious only of the perception and of his emotional response, is the fact which makes possible men's confusion about the nature and source of emotions.
There are many reasons why a person may remain unaware of the evaluative processes underlying his emotions. Among the most important of these reasons are the following. 1. Competence at introspecting and identifying one's own mental processes has to be acquired. It has to be learned. Most people have not formed the habit of seeking to account to themselves for the reasons of their beliefs, emotions, and desires. Consequently, when they do attempt it, they frequently fail and do not persevere. 2. Most people do not hold their values and convictions in clearly defined form. Vagueness and obscurity characterize a good deal of their mental contents. Their beliefs and values have never been formulated in precise, objective language, and are stored in the subconscious only as approximations, by means of preverbal symbols, such as images, which their owners cannot easily translate into objective, articulate speech. 3. Sometimes, an emotion and the value considerations underlying it are extremely complex. For example, suppose a wife is emotionally upset. She knows that the feeling involves her husband. Perhaps, he has been inconsiderate of her in some way, but he is working very hard and is under a strain. But she, too, is under a strain and is tired of bearing the emotional burden of his work pressures. Still, she knows she is inclined to be oversensitive. On the other hand, she wants to be honest with him about her feelings. But she does not want to upset him and, perhaps, make the situation worse. All of these considerations may be clashing in her subconscious. On the conscious level, she feels an emotion of diffuse irritation at the universe in general, and at her husband in particular, plus some amount of guilt, and she cannot untangle the reasons. 4. Sometimes, one responds emotionally to things of which one is not aware. For example, one may meet a person for whom one feels an almost instant dislike. Yet, if one searches one's mind, one can think of nothing objectionable that he has said or done. It may be the case that one was peripherally aware of affectations in his posture and way of moving, or of some subtle insincerity in his voice, or of some negative implications in his remarks that one did not pause to identify fully, and one's subconscious reacted accordingly. 5. The single most formidable obstacle to identifying the roots of one's emotions is repression. Since the values that underlie some people's emotional reactions are offensive to their self-respect and conscious convictions, the causes of such reactions may be barred from awareness. An artist who has a block against admitting the envy he feels toward a more talented rival may be quite unaware and ferociously resistant to recognizing that the elation he feels was caused by news of the failure of his rival's art show. It is interesting to observe that those who are most prone to rhapsodize about their emotions and to speak disparagingly of reason are those who are most incompetent at introspection and most ignorant of the source of their emotions. They regard their emotions as the given, as mystical revelations, as the voice of their blood or of their instincts, to be followed blindly. For example, consider the following statement by D.H. Lawrence. My great religion is a belief in the blood, the flesh, as being wiser than the intellect. We can go wrong in our minds, but what our blood feels and believes and says is always true. The intellect is only a bit and a bridle. What do I care about knowledge? All I want is to answer to my blood, direct, without frittling intervention of mind or moral, or what not. Lawrence expresses the position in an extreme form, but in a milder, less flamboyant manner. Many people live by, more precisely, die by, this doctrine every day.
Man is an integrated organism. His nature, qua living entity, does not contain contradictory elements. Reason and emotion, thinking and feeling, are not mutually inimical faculties. But they perform radically different functions, and their functions are not interchangeable. Emotions are not tools of cognition. To treat them as such is to put one's life and well-being in the gravest danger. What one feels in regard to any fact or issue is irrelevant to the question of whether one's judgment is true or false. It is not by means of one's emotions that one apprehends reality. One of the chief characteristics of mental illness is the policy of letting one's feelings, one's wishes and fears, determine one's thinking, guide one's actions and serve as one's standard of judgment. This is more than a symptom of neurosis, it is a prescription for neurosis. It is a policy that involves the wrecking of one's rational faculty. It is not accidental, but logical and inevitable, that the predominant emotions an irrationalist is left with, after he has put this policy into practice, are depression, guilt, anguish, and fear. The notion of the happy irrationalist, like that of the happy psychotic, is a myth, as any psychotherapist is in a position to testify. Whether or not they regard their emotions as reliable guides to action, the majority of people tend to regard some of them, in effect, as primaries, as just there. Yet the evidence to refute such an error is overwhelming and readily available. The mere perception of an object has no power to create an emotion in man, let alone to determine the content of the emotion. The emotional response to an object is inexplicable, except in terms of the value significance of the object to the perceiver. And this necessarily implies a process of appraisal. For example, 3 men look at a scoundrel. The first man recognizes to what extent this person, in his craven irrationality, has betrayed his status as a human being, and feels contempt. The second man wonders how he can be safe in a world where such persons can prosper, and feels fear. The third man secretly envies the scoundrel's success, and feels a sneaking admiration. All 3 men perceive the same object. The differences in their emotional reactions proceed from differences in their evaluation of the significance of what they perceive. Just as emotions are not created by objects of perception as such, so they are not the product of any sort of innate ideas. Having no innate knowledge of what is true or false, man can have no innate knowledge of what is good for him or evil. A man's values, to repeat, are a product of the quantity and quality of his thinking. An emotional response is always the reflection and product of an estimate, and an estimate is the product of a person's values, as the person understands them to apply to a given situation.